Welcome back to Bear Era. The Bears are back, and so are we. There's football on the field. There's things to talk about that aren't greatest of all time lists. So we are here as promised, and the Bears are a couple of days into camp. It's time for us to talk about all the storylines that we have from Chicago Bears camp so far. Only a couple of days in. Ciaran, you excited? We got football on grass again.
Woo! Yay! Yeah. It's we get to. I always hate the start of training camp because you get everyone dissecting every little thing that's written and every little play that's out there, and it's I think JJ Watt put out a very good tweet today that like these guys are working on specific things, so don't get too high and don't get too low on plays you might see in training camp, because once preseason games start, you're gonna stop caring about those training camp practices, and then eventually when regular season starts, you don't care who looked good or who looked bad in training camp as long as they look good on Sunday. So yeah, it's nice to see how this thing all comes together because it's all new. So that's what I'm probably most excited about, to see how this thing develops, and will they be prepared for Monday Night Football in week 1 against the Minnesota Vikings.
Yeah, it's very easy to overreact to early training camp storylines because we haven't had football. We've been deprived, and now we have football, even if it's fake football, in shells, installs, guys learning specific skills, guys learning, in this case for the Bears, their new coaching staff. Most of these position groups have new coaches, again, outside of special teams, and they're learning what they want, what they require, what their style is, not to mention new playbooks, cadence for practice, everything else. Now, they have some of that from OTAs, but it's different. Training camp, you hit the grind, you're back on the field. Time is really limited, so the coaching staff is going to try and squeeze every possible learning moment out of there, and that puts a lot of pressure on guys. Of course, the young guys who've come in, undrafted free agents especially, are trying to impress, and you don't have that many opportunities to do it. So although it seems kind of lackadaisical in the middle of July, it's a high pressure environment. Everybody's getting used to everybody else, new teammates, new coaches, new systems. So yeah, I think JJ's advice is really good. Don't get too high, don't get too low, but certainly look for some of the themes. And we're going to talk about some of those themes right now. And the first one I want to kick off with that is both refreshing, although it may be causing some fans some consternation, is Ben Johnson is demanding his typically high standard of what's going to be acceptable for the offense. We saw it yesterday in day one, pulled the offense off the field when they weren't, up to muster, and replace them and said that's not the way we're going to do this. And I think it's a good thing, but I think it's also very important to keep in mind that for all coaches or teachers or parents out there, it is way easier to start off strict and then ease up as you go on than it is to try and be lax in the early going and then get tough later on as time goes on and say, no, what I really meant was it doesn't work that way. So I appreciate that Ben has that detail orientation. That is a marked difference from previous coaching staffs, and that he is starting off setting the standard and saying, this is what will be acceptable to be on the field, to be a Chicago Bear.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really important that this is kind of put out straight. I know Ben Johnson kind of downplayed it a little bit when I know the media kind of went a little bit overboard, and fans maybe went a little bit overboard of him yanking off the first team offense on the 7-on-7. And he basically said today that they only had 90 minutes. They need to get through this very quickly. And he's right. And that's good for a new coach, because it's something he's going to be thinking about as it's his first time preparing training camp. So it's good that he's able to do that. He's able to, that he knows there's no messing about. But at the same time, you heard what Cole Kmet said, that it wasn't good enough and that shouldn't happen. And that kind of got reiterated again today from Ben Johnson, where he was saying that the guys know where they need to be and they need to make sure that they have all their ducks in a row, that when they have a play that's out there, that they're not making mistakes that they shouldn't make. And that's the reason that they got taken off, because they were taking too long to get it done. And yeah, it's good to see, because as you said, you can, if you're a new coach, it's fun. You can be that kind of hard ass, or you can be, if you want accountability, you have to be hard on them early on. You can be a player's coach and be hard, but if you're a player's coach and are like a soft touch with the guys, eventually they take advantage of that. It's like the whole substitute teacher type thing, right?
Yeah.
Like if you come in and people are, or and you're, the class is not afraid of you, they're not they don't really care. It's kind of what happened with Eberflus, right? Like they knew that the players knew they could take advantage of the coaches, and that's exactly what they did. Ben Johnson's not allowing that to happen. His coaches aren't allowing that to happen. And that's one of the things we mentioned when we heard about certain coaches that came in here. Like, you are not getting past Eric Bieniemy. He's not going to let you do that. Same thing we hear from Antoine Randall as well. He's on those receivers 24/7. And that is really good to hear. And that's why you do surround yourselves with coaches like a Dennis Allen that are uber prepared for everything. But again, also, it will be a hard ass on his defense. And that's exactly what they need. So I think it's good that you're hearing that from Ben Johnson, but also it's trickling down to the other coaches where nobody's letting anything slide. And you have to do that early, because if you let up at all, that's where a little kind of chink in the armor might come through, and that's where you might see some of the similar problems. This team needs to be held accountable, and it's good that they are early on.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I like Johnson's approach because I think you can be firm and clear. You don't necessarily have to be mean or a hard ass or even loud, but say, this is the standard I expect. And I'm going to be very clear about that. I'm not going to make you guess, right? If I pull you off, you're going to know why I pulled you off and how you need to correct it, which is the most important thing for both sides to have success here. And it is interesting because we talk a lot about the players getting used to it and whatever else. It's Ben Johnson's first time running the entire show. And man, would I like to be a fly on the wall in those coaching sessions afterwards to hear what conversations he's having with EB, what conversations he's having with Dennis Allen, who's been a head coach before, and saying, all right, where did this work the way we want it to work? And, what did you guys see from me? I would be shocked if Ben Johnson wasn't asking that of the other coaches about his own performance, given that it's his first time, and looking for that constructive criticism. I think he is well self-assured enough to be able to open that up and say, hey, okay, I can take what other people who have experience in this role are seeing of me. And I love all of that. It bleeds into our second point, which is the reports of the offense's early, and I'm going to put it in air quotes, struggles. Couple of things to keep in mind here. It also ties into what JJ said. They're not typically struggles, and they typically happen pretty early for all offenses. It takes longer for offenses to get in sync than it does defenses. We're seeing that with the Bears again this year. That's been a Chicago staple forever, but it is also a staple in camps around the league. Defenses spin up more quickly than offenses do. The timing on offense is more difficult to grasp, especially with a new coaching staff. So I wouldn't really call them struggles. They're getting used to all of these things, including the offense. And I'm not going to worry about it yet. Give it another 4 weeks, 5 weeks. If we are still seeing the same type of mistakes, that's a huge problem. I don't expect that we will be. On day 2, again, we're all thirsty for pictures, highlights, news, snippets, rumors, whatever we can get. I wouldn't call it struggles quite yet. I would not expect the offense to come out. It came to me today that, like, if you've been trying to get in shape for a while and you haven't been in shape, and the Bears offense has not been in shape for some time, and, the players are in shape, they're out working out and whatever, but they're trying to fit their talents into the new system. And if you went out and hired yourself a new personal trainer and you showed up at the first training session and absolutely just killed it, just smashed it, like, the trainer would be like, why did you hire me again? Like, you might show up having worked out and being what you think is in great shape, but the trainer is there to put you through the paces, figure out where your weaknesses are, and help you get better. You're not probably going to look great in the very first session, or in the Bears case, the first 2 sessions. So that's that's just kind of what this organization is going through right now. And people are going to characterize it because there is this hyperfixation. People are doing, charting passing attempts during practice in early training camps is one of my least favorite things out there, because not every pass that's completed is where it was supposed to go, and not every pass that was incomplete is considered a bad rep. But we'd look at completion numbers as if it was a game. It's not a game, it's practice, and it's early. So all of those things to say, keep it in mind. Don't put too much stock into this notion of the offense struggling early on, because there's a lot of other stuff going on the field.
I feel like you've had cameras in my gym this week, EJ, the way you're talking about the way you're talking about trainers and struggling. That was definitely me this week. But yeah, like I would say that I find it difficult to really judge a lot of everything early on in camp. And the reason for it is when you don't have pads on, like it's not genuine 11 on 11 or 7 on 7. It's basically tag football, where your offensive line, they're kind of standing there. They'll get into their stance. They'll do what's expected on the play. The defensive line will go into, and look, the defensive line are typically going to beat the offensive line when it comes to this type of play, because the offensive line, when you don't have pads on, you're not going to go full go. And typically when you're in attack mode, you're probably going to win 99 times out of 100 in those situations. So then, and also you have to remember, the defenses come up against, eventually they come up against the same players. They know what they're going to do, especially when, again, a lot of this stuff right now is kind of your vanilla type stuff, where you're trying to see what works, what doesn't. And sometimes, and this is what I think JJ Watt was getting to earlier on Twitter, is on certain plays, the defense knows what the play is, the offense knows what the play is, but the offense or the coach is asking the offense to, or they could be asking the quarterback to make a certain throw or to make a certain play. So it might not be the decision you might make in live action, but it's what they want to test you on. So those are some of the things. So like I used to get really high and really low about kind of all the kind of intricacies of it, but like I've been through it where you see the defense and looking really good in training camp, and then suddenly week 1 comes along and it looks awful. So like at the end of the day, I think the key thing here is that the guys get the work in, that when you get to week 1, there's no major injuries and players are football ready. They're prepared, because people need to remember is these guys have been off for 5 or 6 weeks now. So like, yes, they had mini camp, they had OTAs, and yes, they will work out, but we all know that's not football shape. The first 2 days, it's not going to be reminiscent. Look, if we're still talking about this at the end of training camp, after the joint practices and everything, and the offense is still struggling with many components of what they want to do, and in week 1, you can be a little bit nervous then. But early on in training camp, I don't think it's something to be concerned about. The main things that I would look at is who's kind of getting the upper hand in some of those key position battles that we don't know who's starting yet. When will guys like Luther Burden get out there? When will Braxton Jones and Colson Loveland be 100%? They're both out there. I understand that, but if they were going live right now, they wouldn't be out there. So from talking to different reporters and talking to different people, that if they were doing it with pads on and stuff, Braxton Jones and Colson Loveland would probably be on bikes and would probably be on the sidelines right now, because they are healthy enough to be back, but they are not in football shape yet. So there's still many things that have to be ironed out here. You still don't have guys like Jalen Johnson, who's going to be out for the next couple of weeks. So you're getting to see some new faces. And again, training camp is all about giving players the opportunity to earn roles. And that's what I'm kind of more focused on, and seeing how that goes. Obviously, the key one that we'll talk about on the episode today will be kind of the left tackle, because that's the one position on offense that is completely open, that we don't know what's happening yet. We can kind of theorize what we think is who has the upper hand based on what we've heard from Ben Johnson and things like that. But they're going to have different days where they're just going to give, like I know in day one, Aussie Trapillo was the number one. They had Ciaran and Magaji. Today they'll probably have Braxton another day, and that's the way they're going to do it until probably 2 or 3 weeks into training camp, and then they'll make a decision. And it's going to be interesting to see how that goes. But yeah, there's a lot of things that need to be ironed out here in training camp. You need to figure out who are your depth guys on the offensive line, who are going to be those receivers you can trust after DJ and Rome if Luther is out for an extended period of time. I know Ben Johnson says it's day to day, but again, soft tissue injuries, you do have to be careful with those. You don't want to rush him back or bring him back, and then suddenly he gets one where he like tears his hamstring and is then out for way longer. What I like about it is that you're not in a position to where that's going to be a big deal for you, because you have other options. And we mentioned it before, there's not as much pressure on him when you have a DJ, Rome, Cole, Colston, and probably Zacchaeus that all have opportunities, and probably him and Zacchaeus would probably have been kind of where the snaps were going to be decided between those two guys. The rest of them are going to be options in front of Luther early on, I would have said, even prior to mini camps and OTAs, just based on their positioning on the teams where they were drafted as well in terms of Colston. So I don't think I think it would have been a bigger deal if the Bears don't have Rome and don't have DJ and you draft this guy at the top of the second round, or even if it was late in one and then he has injuries, you'd be more concerned then. But I think as of now, I'm not too concerned. You just want them to get out there so they can put their best foot forward, so that they have an opportunity to really compete for a role.
Yeah, you mentioned a bunch of stuff there. Let's go through the absences real quick. Luther Burden, of course, minor soft tissue injury is what coach said today. He's been out since rookie mini camp. Again, you got to be careful with him, but yeah, he's probably, even if he was in the best shape of his life, the fifth receiving option in this offense, if not sixth. So yes, you want him to get out there. Yes, you want him to get up to speed. You want to see what you have in him and whether or not he can move up and down that depth chart. But for now, I think caution is warranted. Zay Frazier's out with the family issue for now. Shamar Turner, also an injury issue, seems minor. As far as the offensive line shuffling, that is going to be a point of contention. Look, Chicago has not had offensive line stability for a couple of years, so there's going to be a white-hot focus on this. Right now, the rotation is just that. This is Dan Richard looking at all his guys, getting eyes on everybody, seeing what they do well. And if you talk to offensive linemen, none of this matters yet. Until they get the pads on, offensive linemen do not care about these reps. They want to use them to make sure they're getting the right calls. They're really mental reps at this point. In terms of who's going to be in that position when the bullets start flying week one, it's not going to be decided at all before the pads come on, and even not in the first few padded sessions. But until the pads come on, offensive linemen largely roll their eyes at like deciding factors of early practices. It's not a thing. So right now it's Dan Richard getting his guys out there, getting comfortable, seeing what they do well, seeing what their strengths are, who he can lean on, who's making mental mistakes, who's not. That's all he's going to find out right now. And don't read too much more into that. Again, Braxton Jones is out there, but getting spun back up in terms of going full go. So we're not going to know anything about this for a while until Braxton does get fully healthy, cleared, and the pads come back on, and we see some real live reps in anger against that defense deep into August. Then we'll start to know, it looks like this guy has the upper hand. He's winning more of these that actually do matter. Haven't heard much about the defense so far, and that's individually. In general, we're just more so hearing that they're ahead of the offense, which again is the typical state for early in camp, any camp, especially Chicago's camp over the years, but any camp right now, the defense is going to be clicking a little bit more than the offense is. So I don't find any of that surprising. And really, it's about trying to figure out how this team is adapting to a very new style and how quickly they're going to be able to make an impact with that. So those are the big things I've got. Those are the sort of bullet points we have heading into this off only, again, 2 days worth of camp, but happy to open it up for everybody's questions. We're sure you have them, many of them. We'll start sorting through the chat and seeing what we can find. But that's how we're going to start it off. And again, biggest news we have to watch, and you said it earlier, is nobody takes a major injury at this point. That is the biggest thing that everybody wants to happen. Is it going to happen? League wide? Yes. Every year there are injuries in training camp. It sucks. There's all this potential, all this hope. Organizations are counting on a guy to play a certain role, and he goes down in training camp, and that's just, it does happen. Let's hope it doesn't happen to the Bears. It would be nice to have all the pieces on the board come week one. That's every coach's hope. That would be some good luck to have going into year one of Ben Johnson.
Yeah, I always hate to see injuries early on. Like, I know rivals and everything like that, but you always hate, like, what was it, last week you started to hear certain guys from the Lions, one of their defensive linemen basically out for the year. You had Ciaran Arnold today kind of coming through that he's going to be out for a couple of weeks, and you start seeing guys throughout the league. Obviously for the Jets, they seem to have kind of been lucky there, but it seemed like Justin Fields could have had a serious injury, but actually I think it was just like a dislocated toe or something like that.
I love that we call that just a dislocated toe. As someone that has dislocated a toe before, not the big one, holy cow, does that hurt? And we know that players go through a lot, but people are like, oh, it's just a dislocated small toe. It's not that big a deal. I'm like,
it's probably a bigger deal for him, considering he runs so much. But I think it's more of like, in comparison to when the reports started coming out, you were like, ooh, this doesn't sound good at all. And that would have basically ended their season before it even starting, because that's your starting quarterback and you don't have anything afterwards. So yeah, you just want to make sure that, again, I think guys have to be smart out there. Like we heard today, the very end of practice, one of the last plays where Olamide Zacchaeus gets basically gets his a big ding from one of the corners on the team when there's no pads on. That doesn't need to happen. Little things like that, where I'm sure Ben Johnson and the coaches will be reiterating to them that, like, you are still a team. You can play hard, but don't be stupid. Don't go after somebody. You don't need to do that. They need to make sure that they're football ready, but also you do not want to have a player missing weeks of the regular season because of something that happens in training camp.
It's super important. It's practicing the correct way. And I get reminded of this every year when we go to the combine and you get all these guys that are out there. It's the biggest job interview of their life. They're trying to go as hard as they can. And there are rules at the combine, right? They are unspoken, but they're only spoken. They're not written rules. And they tell these guys, like, hey, ball's out of your reach. Do not dive for ball. We don't want anybody breaking their collarbone here. And sure enough, these guys are super competitive, and somebody will be 40 yards down the field and lay out for a ball. The coaches will get on them. Hey, don't do that. We don't want you getting hurt here. That's not the point. We need you to run these drills as hard as you can, but we need you to run them the right way. And it's the same for practices. There are rules for NFL practices, not only the NFLPA's rules, but also a coach's rules about, no, this is thump only. Thump means get up, grab the guy, wrap him up, keep him on his feet. Nobody goes down. No legs get tangled. These are the ways that we practice. And when, again, people get hyped up, motions maybe run too high, maybe people are coming from another program where it was always live hitting with pads, you never know. And you got to get everybody in line so everybody's on the same page. So especially a quarterback doesn't get hurt, but really everybody doesn't get hurt. Everybody gets that opportunity to be out on the field, show their talent, and see whether or not they fit in with this team. Some questions about whether or not Caleb's going to be fine. I just want to set the stage for Caleb, which is there's a lot of change for Caleb Williams, and a lot of it's positive, but it's still a lot of change. And people that deal with change management, as I used to in one of my old jobs, will tell you it doesn't matter if it's good change or bad change. It all has the same impact. Like, good change is still taxing, right? Maybe you buy a new house and you have to move. It's still very, very difficult. It's like, hey, we're upgrading, we're getting a house, we're going to own it. It's really cool, but it's very stressful. And there have been a lot of good changes, some difficult changes, but there is just a lot of change. And we're talking about some fundamental changes to the way Caleb Williams is being asked to play. And it starts with things as basic as the way his feet are set when he catches the ball. Used to be he was a right foot forward quarterback when he caught the ball in a shotgun snap. Ben has asked him to be a left foot forward quarterback, and that helps him get into the play more quickly. Sounds pretty basic, but when you sit down at dinner tonight, pick up your fork with your left hand if you're right-handed. Just try it. You're going to be like, wait. So it seems like a small thing. The other thing that's much larger is the Lions were number one in play action, I believe, last year. It was either number one or number four. They were right up at the top of the league in play action under center usage in the entire league. That is what Ben does. When we talk about Ben's offense, that is Ben's offense. It is under center play action at a higher rate than almost anybody else in the NFL. Caleb hasn't played a ton of that style. It's not that he's never played that style. He played some of it at USC. They played some of it last year, but it is a different skill set. And the guys that have that skill set and are really good at it are really valuable. Matt Stafford has that skill set. Obviously, Jared Goff has that skill set. There are other guys that play an under center play action heavy style. It requires you to, again, turn your eyes away from the defense, take a pre-snap picture, take the snap, turn your eyes away from the defense, get to the top of your drop, reestablish, make a good ball fake, reestablish your eyes, pick out where the defenders have rotated to, because they will have rotated in the modern NFL, and then make the right read. It's a difficult system to play in. It puts a lot on the quarterback, and he's being asked to do all of those things, big and small, at the same time. It's not going to look super combobulated right now. And I realize super combobulated is not a word. That's okay. I'm going to use it. All the parts are not going to fire on every play. As long as he's getting the basics and stacking some of those wins, we're going to start to see all that pay off down the road. But it's not all just going to magically look great, no matter how much homework he did in the offseason. It's a difficult thing to master on every play, and it is the style he is going to play the most of. Does that mean the Bears are never going to be in shotgun? No, they will be, of course. All teams run almost all things, but predominantly he's going to be an under center quarterback being asked to run a heavy dose of play action. And that's new for him. And he's learning all those skills on the fly at a very high level. So there are going to be some practices that don't look great. Just that doesn't mean Caleb Williams is a bad quarterback or he can't overcome it or anything else. And you're still seeing the physical skills, which is one of my favorite things. We saw him roll out today and throw cross body. Didn't look pretty, but the throw was pretty. Like the actual physical manifestation of making it happen was not awesome, but it's all there. His arm is still incredibly live. He's still a very smart quarterback. He's learning a whole lot of new skills all at once. Give him some grace. Can I say it's going to be great? I don't know if it's going to be great. I sure hope it is. Do I think it's going to be terrible right off because of, some piece of his game that's not compatible with that system? No, I don't think that at all.
He's a talented quarterback. Like, these guys figure it out. It takes time. I always go back to, and this is where it's the whole, like, not getting too high or too low. Like, you see, if you can just follow a couple of like Chiefs beat reporters. Patrick Mahomes throws interceptions in training camp.
Yep.
Right.
Sure does.
Like, the offense in Kansas City, if you listen and watch, because I followed different guys over there from the beat reporters that I'm friends with, and you'll constantly see tweets kind of coming up of where the Chiefs offense looks clunky in training camp. Does it look clunky when they play in the regular season? No, it does not. They tend to play very, very good football. It's the way it works out in training camp. I think a big part of it is a lot of Bears fans are scarred because
for sure
we constantly go through training camp where it's always like defense looks better than the offense, and then suddenly the offense just doesn't look good in the regular season. Things are a little bit different, but like you do have to give it time, because it does take time when you are putting in a new system where like in training camp, what they're asking players to do, it gets ramped up more. They're obviously having practice, but then they're going back to the film room. They're going back to study. They're basically saying they're going to give them something on one day and then add on to it the next day and then go back to something else that they were looking at. And it's not an easy process for these guys to get the hang of. And typically you start to see it look a bit more fluid kind of towards the end of week 2 and heading into kind of week 3, because they've been all around each other for a while at that point. And you start to see kind of more parts of the offense. They're still not going to do everything, because they're not going to put things out there, because they know teams can find ways to see what happens. So no team really puts everything out there in camp. It's just preparing the guys. Like, most of the work really is done in the film room. Most of the work is done in the classroom, because they will never put out a big portion of their playbook. When it comes to training camp, it's more of the concepts and what certain players on offense and on defense feel comfortable with, and trying to maximize the strengths. And if there's something that they don't feel comfortable with, how can we kind of minimize those weaknesses during training camp? As we heard from Ben Johnson, they don't have that much time. This is not back in the early 2000s where they can do 2-a-days, where they've have as basically as much time as they want. Now they don't have that. Day 1, they had 90 minutes to do everything in practice. Now, when you're trying to explain stuff to players and doing warm-ups and all that, you're really probably getting 60 minutes of play, because there's different things that are happening at different parts of the practice. So yeah, I don't envy coaches anymore, because it's not easy to instill everything that you want. And that's why we always say those first like 2 or 3 weeks of the regular season usually are terrible quality, because teams aren't ready for the regular season because they simply didn't have enough time in training camp. And that's the reality. And it puts teams like the Bears and some of the other teams with new head coaches here, you are at a little bit of a disadvantage, because you are learning a completely new system. But that's the way it is. They've got to just put in the work in the classroom and try and maximize the amount of time that they do have on the field.
Yeah, you have to do it. I designed a training in my previous life that took 4 hours. It was business training, and we had 4 hours to get it done. It was very busy, 4 hours. And about 3 years into it, they said, okay, you have an hour and 15 minutes to train the same amount of stuff. And I was like, well, it was already pretty tight. The results in certain cases weren't great. And the answer is you have to ask students at that point, and the students are the players, to do some of that work outside and come prepared and come with some knowledge. We cannot start at ground zero with 90 minutes and learn an offense. You need to know the offense before you get here, and we are going to work on specific pieces of it. And again, you see that need for crispness in practice. I can't be standing around telling you guys to pick it up or get it done or tell you what you did wrong. You need to come out here and get that part right so that I can give you the rest of the pieces, because again, I as a coach only have 90 minutes. There's a question about other low-key position battles in terms of Dennis Allen's preference and style on defense. I have been very vocal throughout the offseason saying I really like the cornerbacks in the Bears cornerback room as they're fit as Dennis Allen corners. They are press man, physical corners. I think they are going to excel there for the most part. Certainly Tyreek and Jalen as the starters. Zay Frazier was drafted absolutely for that style. He is a young, and I mean young in the position, corner. He's only been playing corner for about a year and a half, but he already exhibits a lot of traits in that style. I think Terrell Smith is going to struggle a little bit more. He's not as fluid. He is a better zone corner in my estimation, and he's better in a straight line. I don't know that he's going to excel. I don't think he's going to be bad, but he was probably better in the previous system. I'm really interested in the edge player battle rotation in general. Now, we know Montez Sweat is going to be out there. Dio is going to be the starter because, again, he is a Dennis Allen prototype in terms of what Dennis Allen likes for physical, big pocket compressing edges. But behind that, those guys can't play every snap, and they shouldn't. In fact, they should play maybe 60% of the snaps throughout the year. And you're going to need a platoon of 3 to 4 other guys that can take meaningful reps for this defense. And that's Austin Booker, Dominique Robinson, Daniel Hardy, and even some of the UDFAs they brought in. I want to see if any of those guys stand out. That's going to be the second wave of edges in this defense, because the other thing is Dennis Allen doesn't typically blitz at a high rate. He does blitz. He'll bring linebackers on occasion. He'll do some overloads. He will do stunts, but he really requires his front four to get it done. And that's a little bit Fangio-like. It's a different style than Fangio, but the idea, the ethos of the defense is the same. If you're one of the guys up front in my defense, I need you to win whatever your particular role is on that play for the rest of the defense to win. I'm not going to bring a lot of help to chip or have you occupy somebody so that somebody else can come and do that. Doesn't happen a ton. Not saying it doesn't happen ever, but largely the basis of the defense is the front four has to win. So I think we like the starting depth for defensive tackle even a little bit more, but that edge group is where I'm going to be watching and seeing if anybody has really taken a leap or takes a leap in this new defense and really sort of takes to the requirements that Dennis Allen is asking of those players.
It's going to be interesting to see how he moves that defensive line around, because we look at it and there's a lot of interior players that you feel good about in terms of, obviously Billings is Billings. He's going to be where he is. But when you have a guy like Grady Jarrett, you also have Javon, who's athletic enough to have, if you want to put him on the outside or inside on certain plays, you can do it. Shamar Turner has done both. You're going to see him more on the inside, but then we mentioned it, there's bigger guys in terms of the prototype to where he sees like Dio, and it's going to be interesting. Do they run with the current group, or when you get closer to the end of training camp and there's guys still out there, do you bring someone in? Obviously, we heard last year, probably towards the end of camp, that they tried to make a trade and bring somebody in. It'll be interesting to see if there's a move that does happen, if they need a little bit extra juice on the edge. It's going to be interesting to see what they do. I guess the other name, just in terms of the DB, that's been interesting is Nashawn Wright, who was brought in, played with the Dallas Cowboys, played with the Minnesota Vikings, has experience with the coaches on defense, and has been covering in for Jalen Johnson here. Now, obviously, we know, say, Frazier has been out with a personal issue, and there's been other guys that are out, but this mimics what has happened prior to in OTA's minicamp. He's been a guy that people have mentioned that he's been impressing, and he's the one that's playing with the first team defense right now. So that's another guy that people maybe didn't expect coming in, was kind of a low-key signing, and is somebody that has stepped up, and there's been mention of him from players and then obviously on coaches as well. So that's another, with maybe, like you mentioned, Terrell Smith may fall back a bit, but you'll see other guys that will suit the system a little bit more and will propel themselves up a little bit. I think my biggest worry on the defense in terms of sorry.
Oh, it always happens, right? You don't put a glass of water next to it. You're going to get that 100% of the time. Man. That's the podcaster law.
Yeah. It's the backups for safety is the one that I'm going to drink some water.
That's okay. I would agree with you. The backups for safety, I was surprised how many Bears fans were like, "Oh no, we're really deep at safety in this offseason." And I was like, I'm not sure that's true. We have what I would call solid players in Jonathan Owens and Elijah Hicks, but those guys aren't keeping me from bringing anybody in, whether it's free agents, whether it's drafting somebody shakes loose in camp. Those aren't guys for the most part that are like, no, we're good 4 deep. We don't need any extra safety depth. I was surprised how many people were satisfied with that. I don't know if Dennis Allen is. We'll see. But, does a guy like Major Burns get a little bit of run later on in camp? There's not a lot there. And the other thing is injury concerns, right? We all want Jaquan Brisker to be on the field, be healthy, stay away from any further concussion issues, but there's no guarantee of that. And you're, 1 or 2 big hits away from Elijah Hicks being the starter. That's not a position of strength, I would say. So also interesting, do they give a guy like Terrell Smith a run at safety if, Deshaun Wright comes in and plays well at corner and, they go, hey, we have enough corners, but maybe we've got this guy who's got good linear speed, good size, can hit coming from depth. Maybe Terrell Wright sees a little bit of a shift there. I'm not saying that's what should happen. I'm saying it's what could happen. And then you are always going to see, I think, good front offices keep their eyes open during training camp because there is a lot of roster movement coming. Every roster in the league right now is at 90 players. They all have to be down to 53 by the start. And you're going to see players get cut loose, and maybe players that are talented enough to come in and be, it's tough to call them starters, but it's also tough not to. When you're playing as much nickel and dime, your third safety is essentially a starter. They're playing something like 60% of the snaps, play a lot of dime. And I'm not super solid on that depth either.
No, it's a big concern. Like, you've Jonathan Owens that's there behind, but my biggest concern, it'd be different if you had like your starting safeties where you felt very good, but like Kevin Byard, older in age, Jaquan Brisker, multiple injuries. So the likelihood of an injury between those two is quite likely. So that's where I would like to feel a little bit better about the depth there, and I just don't.
Yeah, and people are saying, "Oh, Major Burns isn't great." Well, yeah, that's why he's a UDFA. We'll see how he fits. But somebody's asking. There's a question up here about Tano Passignon. Anybody else still in on Tano Passignon, who was signed this week? They say, I really liked his flashes in NOLA. He did have some flashes in NOLA, and he is such a DA fit through and through. Again, he played for Dennis Allen there as well. I'm not surprised at all by the signing. Neither am I moved. Sure. I would hope that they were adding more talent than that. I think Tano Passignon is a solid player, and you do need solid players that come in and play multiple downs for your football team. Those down eating players, especially along the defensive line. It is a high strain position. It is a high wear position. And you do need guys who, for lack of a better term, are football placeholders who can come in, perform their role. They're not going to give you a lot of flash plays, but they're also not going to give up a ton of plays. If they are mismatched against a higher talent, they're not really going to hold up, but they lose gracefully. And that's what you need. You need those guys on your offensive line. You need those guys on your defensive line. Sometimes you got linebackers that don't have a full range of skill sets. We're former special teamers who could just come in, do the role for several plays, give a starter little breath on the sideline, and then come back in. You need those guys all over your football team to fill in for injuries. So Tano Passignon, I see very much in that category as a guy that knows the system, can come in, play the role, fits the physical type. Are we going to look up midseason and see Tano Passignon going on a tear? No. I really don't believe that's going to happen. But is he a make sense signing? Yeah. On multiple levels, he is a make sense signing.
Yeah, when I got to free agency, I put out a list of players that had links to the coaching staff and players I thought the Bears would sign, and he was one of them on defense, just because it made sense in terms of it would always be a low cost move, but it fits what DA likes to do. It's kind of the similar style to when you look at I know we weren't very high on Ruben Hippolyte the third, just because nobody really knew about him. Even though like we would have done a lot of extensive work on the draft, but when you look at kind of the body type, the athleticism, you're like, yeah, it's not a surprise. DA would advocate for a guy like that, and it's the
Mhm.
same thing for Tano. Like you look at him, you look at even guys that people have kind of written off, like a Dominique Robinson. Like he's somebody that probably will benefit from DA coming in here because he has the body type that he looks for. Same thing for Dio. Like it's not a surprise that he's the guy that they signed.
No,
Like it's
it
not a
was the
surprise
farthest
at
thing
all.
from a surprise when they signed Dio. It was like, of course.
Yeah. So you just hope with the way DA has set up his defenses in the past that he's able to maximize some of these guys. And maybe we're not thinking of them as kind of game changers or big play guys. And then suddenly it's somebody that comes into his system and it just works. Like there was plenty of guys over the years in New Orleans that teams wouldn't have put a lot of stock into in adding those players, but they fit what Dennis Allen wanted to do and they were very productive. And there will be players like that right now we are not talking about them as the same breadth of how we talk about Montez and Jervon and even to a point like Billings because they produced in the previous defense, right?
Mhm.
Like there's going to be guys that we're probably not talking about in terms of being one of the central figures of a defense, and then suddenly it's going to work. Like for example, Kyler Gordon was great in the previous defense. He developed really well. There will be players that will develop here that'll work in the defense. Like you mentioned with Terrell Smith, he played really well when he played zone. There's going to be some other corner that it could be Zay Frazier, it could be somebody else that a UDFA, or it can be someone that they could even take off the street that it's just it fits the system and it suits their skill set and they look better playing in this type of defense. And kind of on the other side of it, there's going to be players that people like right now and they might just not fit and they don't play well because they don't fit in the particular scheme that Dennis Allen's going to run. And that is what training camp is all about, to see like who actually fits, who can you trust when
Yep.
you're trying to put together that 53-man roster, because you can't hold on to players that are not going to be able to be productive for you. Like I talk about kind of these position battles, but a part of it is guys that have a lot to prove that kind of on the outside looking in. Like the obvious one on offense is like a Tyler Scott who has been drafted from this by this organization, but there's probably six receivers, seven, maybe even seven receivers ahead of him right now. Like
Yep.
I looked at videos that were put out there from the wide receivers, and normally you see it's just them doing kind of the toe drag on the sideline, and normally it's fairly straightforward. Most guys catch it, most ones get it. He didn't catch his football, and it's like this is the first thing I noticed, and I was like, that is not a good sign to where either you're not on the same page as whoever the quarterback. I couldn't see who was throwing the football, but the fact that the ball was away from you, like either something's wrong on the step count or maybe it could have been a bad pass from the quarterback, but he was the one that didn't catch the football out of everybody that I saw. So like there's little things like that where in training camp you're going to see some guys propel themselves like an Ian Wheeler last year,
Yep.
and other guys are going to fall away. And that's where you get the whole surprise cut when it comes to the 53-man roster. It's not going to be a surprise to the coaches and to Ryan Poles. Probably within, they usually know their 53-man roster within about 3.5 weeks, and really comes down to injuries and the last 3 or 4 players. They know
Yeah.
pretty much everybody that they're going to get rid of before the preseason really starts.
Yeah. Short of injuries, the 53 is set to about 43 right now.
Yeah.
There are about 10 spots in play where they're trying to figure out balance per position. Are we going to take more edges or more defensive tackles? Are we going to carry, 4 linebackers, or is it 5 for special teams? Same thing with receivers. Are we going to carry 5? Are we going to carry 6? Are we going to carry 7? Where are our returners coming from? All those things. All of those decisions really come down to about 10 flexible roster spots right now. 43 to probably even about 45 of these guys are set. They, outside of an injury, they are on the team. They're going to be in the rotation in their particular position room, and that's known right now. So all these guys are fighting for those spots. And then, of course, all the practice squad spots as well. But I know we've sounded a bit like a wet blanket for a bunch of this podcast and trying to keep your fervor down. We don't want to do that for the entire time. The flip side of training camp is guys like JP Richardson who come in and make a couple of flash catches who nobody was paying attention to. It's UDFA, was overshadowed on his own college team by a receiver that was unfortunately drafted by a division rival. But, whatever. And JP comes in and is making a name for himself in the first couple of days. He's turning some heads. Is he going to steal a spot from a guy like Tyler Scott, who was thought to be on this roster, and goes and takes that? That's the exciting thing about training camp. I'm not saying it's going to hold up or continue, but those are the fun battles to look at, is within those last, I'll say 4 or 5 guys, even for the practice squad. That's the tail end of the roster. If you're talking about churn at the NFL level on, overall rosters, it's those last 4 or 5 spots on the practice squad that get churned every single week. It's not a place you want to be because you're likely going to get cut. You might get re-signed, but you're going to move around a lot. So, but the guys that are bucking for those, especially the UDFAs, one of my favorite things about this time of year is watching guys rise, because the NFL is a meritocracy. And make no mistake, if JP Richardson goes out there and crushes it for another 3 weeks, he's making the practice squad. He might not make the 53, but he's gonna have a place where he stays at Hallis Hall, gets a locker, is out there every day on the field with the coaches trying to develop. And it's going to be because if that happens, because he went out there and made plays. And if you make plays in the NFL, you will find your spot on the roster.
And it's really important. I know some people kind of downplay kind of that when you're talking about some of those UDFA guys. I always kind of go back to, was it 2017, 2018, Roy Robertson Harris coming in, changed positions. He was more of kind of your bigger edge guy when he was coming into the league. Bears wanted to shift him more on the inside, and then eventually he gets into the practice squad that first year. Second year, then becomes a part of the defense. Like, you will see guys. I guess another name that people kind of talk about, who's now not with the team anymore, is Jack Sanborn. Originally comes in as a UDFA. Most people thought that he would make the practice squad, ends up making the team. So there's always guys like that. Typically, the ones that people get excited about are the skill positions. It'll be interesting to see guys that were kind of those camp favorites last year. In Ian Wheeler's back, is he going to be 100%? Will that ACL hold up? Because there's still a bit of open competition at running back, and to see who's going to get there. That kind of back, you mentioned it in terms of with JP, that back end of the wide receiver, you had like Maurice Alexander that came in from Detroit, who was on the practice squad for them last year. Like, there's Joel Wilson, who was one of the names at tight end that was impressing during the OTAs, where he was mentioned by Ben Johnson. There's going to be guys like that where, look, we're going to see the starters for very limited snaps in preseason. And then you get to look at some of these guys that, look, most of them won't be on the team, but there will be some guys that are on the practice squad that get elevated, because that's what happens here. That there's so many injuries throughout the season that you may start in the practice squad, but there could be a guy that is signed to the practice squad at the very end of training camp that ends up suiting up for you 2, 3, 4 times in that season just because of injury. So it is an important one to look at. The other thing I like to look at is the offensive line. Who's going to be your premier backups there? Because Ben Johnson has mentioned it many times that you need kind of your 8 or 9 guys. I always kind of go with the old adage of your starting 5 in week 1's not your starting 5 in week 18.
No.
So it's going to be important to see who steps up there, because there's always one or two that surprise that you're not expecting, but actually they just play better. So that's where I'm excited about, especially within this offense, because I always say with Ben Johnson, and when we were talking about free agency and who they could add, I was like, keep looking at receiver, because you go back to those early years with Ben Johnson in Detroit before they added all kind of a lot of extra players in, where it was pretty much just Amon-Ra, and at that stage was Hawkinson was there. You had like guys like Khalif Raymond that won you games. There was the odd game that like this past season that Tim Patrick was the reason that Detroit won a game. Like, there's going to be receivers here that are not named DJ Moore, Rome Odunze, Luther Burden, Olamide Zacchaeus, that could be a reason you win a football game. And that's why it's going to be very important here. And it's going to be interesting to see what guys do stand out. And look, we mentioned it. You may not, one guy who we're probably not thinking about right now might make the 53. But that practice squad, it becomes very, very important. It becomes kind of that a guy you believe in, but you still needs more development because you just don't get enough time at training camp. That's really what that's going to be for. And it is exciting. I love it. We always say it's like your training camp heroes. And it's nice to have those practice squad spots, because then you get to keep them around and fans kind of have that little fuzzy feeling when somebody stays. And it's going to be interesting to see who those guys are going to be. I think fans typically gravitate towards the offensive side of the football. The other thing is going to be interesting is, do they keep 2 quarterbacks, 3 quarterbacks? Because like you get to see, obviously, Case Keenum's come in here. You have Tyson Bagent, Austin Reed. My main hope for Austin Reed is that when he plays, he doesn't get stuck in the middle of a monsoon to where him and his family don't get to watch him actually play football, because that was a little bit disappointing for him last year, where he only got limited snaps when he was supposed to get more. But then they played against the Miami Dolphins and a monsoon literally happened in the middle of the game. So yeah, like, it's good to see. It's always good for the storylines to see how some of these guys perform, guys that are not expected to make rosters. But nobody thought Ian Wheeler would be anything. Like, most people would have thought last year. But like where he came from coming in, he had the skill set, but like usually guys like that you don't always make it. And the fact that he's still here, he's back in training camp, like guys, especially in his position, that tear their ACLs, like when they heal up, teams often might just like let them go because they bring somebody else in. But he's a guy that we could tell last year, there's some, I guess the one positive part of the Hard Knocks was we got to learn about some of these guys, and he was one of them that I think fans really liked. And he's definitely going to be someone that I think during the preseason games, when he goes out there, will get a fairly good ovation from Bears fans, because the way he conducted himself. And you're going to see more of those guys, and they may not be contributors for you now, but maybe in a year or two, they become depth pieces for you on offense and on defense, because again, they fit the system. And that's what it's going to be interesting. There's going to be guys that may have been drafted higher by previous regimes, or may have been brought in as free agents and don't make it because somebody else that they've brought in, from maybe it could be UDFA, maybe it just could be one of those late signings, but have been actually signed by this regime. They can catapult themselves into a position. And that's what makes training camp fun. That I always say it is, once the draft is over, I don't care where you've been drafted. It's then a meritocracy. You have to earn your position. If you don't earn your position, you don't deserve to get the snaps. And that's what I always believe in. It's what I find most enjoyable about camp, what I find most enjoyable about preseason is you see the guys that have been working hard. And those are the guys that get the snaps in preseason when maybe people didn't expect them. You always hear of like fans saying, "Oh, what about this guy? He didn't get to play in the second or third quarter here. He's out in the fourth." Well, he's probably in the fourth quarter because he's not busting his ass enough in training camp. And those those are some of the kind of little snippets that I like about training camp, because for the most part, we know who's going to be starting for this team in like 90% of the positions. So really it's those depth pieces and kind of those up and coming players that you need to develop more. And that's what we brought this coaching staff in to do, is to develop those young players. You do that, like this is the first opportunity we're going to see. Can they make some of these players better than what we would have seen in the past?
We sure hope so. And we're just about an hour. We're going to take one more and cut it while we're all killer, no filler. I'm going to combine a couple of questions, and it says, are you guys more bullish or bearish, no pun intended, on the run game this season? And the next question says, is Swift the worst starting running back in the NFL? I'm going to put those two together because they do really go together. And is DeAndre Swift the worst starter in the NFL? No, he's not.
No.
Now, even last year, he didn't have the greatest year, and we know why. He had 959 yards. Guess how many of those were after contact? Of 959, 623 were after he got touched. So blocking has a lot to do with this, but we have the rare ability to go back and say, well, what happened when DeAndre Swift last played under Ben Johnson? Because he did in his final year in Detroit. Now, his yards per attempt were pretty good, 5.5. He did not have a ton of yards. He only had 542 because he was not the lead back that year. But when you look at his production and his efficiency, he is not the worst, and he is going to show out much more in this system. Now, for those of you that have followed my work for a long time, you might think it's strange that I'm caping up for DeAndre Swift, because he is not my favorite running back and he does not have the greatest vision. I do not believe, though, that he is the worst starting running back in the NFL, and he is going to look a lot better behind a competent, what I believe is going to be a competent offensive line with a competent play caller. Those are two huge things that have, major influence on how the rushing game really plays out week to week and whether or not a guy can use his strength. DeAndre Swift does have strengths. Running between the tackles and making decisions in the mess, not his strength. Running to the outside, yeah. Guess what? Ben Johnson's outside zone percentage is one of the highest in the league from Detroit. He's not going to just dump that in the bin. That's where DeAndre Swift is good. That's what Ben Johnson wants to run. They revitalized the offensive line. And in terms of when those plays get called and how they get called, how they get stacked, how they get layered, ones they go back to in the fourth quarter, Ben Johnson is light years ahead of the last three guys that have done that for the Bears in terms of play calling. So all of those things are going to add up to make DeAndre Swift look as good as he can look. Now, is that the best in the NFL? No. Is it even a top 10 runner in the NFL? No. But is it a bottom of the barrel runner in the NFL? No. He will be mid-pack or better, and we will see plenty of explosive plays out of DeAndre Swift if he stays healthy, because this offense is quite literally built for it, from personnel to play calling.
Yeah, someone's going to step up at the running back position, because even going back to those years with DeAndre Swift, I keep going back to that free agency period where everybody wanted Jamal Williams. And that's just because of the 1 year he had with Ben Johnson, when Ben Johnson kind of took over as kind of OC in kind of like 2022. But this is just like a little snippet of Jamal Williams' career. He kind of averages about 400 or 500 yards. I think it was most years up until that point, I think the highest total he had was 601 yards, which was his first year in Detroit, and then suddenly goes out for 1,066 yards. But the difference there was when you looked at him, he was getting like pretty much every single year of his career is like 4 touchdowns, 3, 1, 2, 3, and then suddenly he gets 17, right? So like, there's going to be somebody that will take a step forward. Will that be DeAndre Swift? Potentially. Will it be Roshan? Maybe. Maybe Kyle Manongai comes through and he develops and he gets a role here and he's one that kind of takes that step forward. That's what's going to make this interesting. Like, there's going to be somebody that has to step up, and there's plenty of options there. And again, we go back to it. It's a meritocracy. Whoever plays well is going to get that opportunity. And in this type of offense, if you do have that opportunity, you can look really good. And that's what a lot of these players have to look into. Roshan needs to look at it as, if he performs well, that helps him get his contract wherever he ends up going. Because again, I don't think the Bears are going to be in a position to where they're going to want to give extensions to running backs. So that's why they have so many right now. So like, this is an offense that puts the running backs in a good position. We saw a little bit of what Roshan was able to do in the red zone last year. We might see a little bit more. Again, I think it's just going to come down to who performs the best, because there's a lot of talent there. What is it, the most like talented running back room in the league? No, but there's different skill sets that the Bears can kind of take advantage of in that room.
And I think they're all going to look better under Ben Johnson than they have under the previous, at least. Well, they had 3 offensive coordinators last year. So I was going to say the previous 2 offensive coordinators. Let's just say the starting offensive coordinators at the beginning of the season. I still have faith in Roshan, and we'll see if that's justified this year. If he doesn't succeed in this system, it's probably going to be tough for him to succeed somewhere else, because finding a better play caller than Ben Johnson in the NFL is a tall order right now. So with that, we are going to kick ourselves out of here before Ciaran's voice dies completely. Mm-hmm. And we'll be back in a couple of weeks to follow up on a bunch of these training camp stories, talk to you about the progress that's been made since then, more reports. Hopefully things are leveling out for the offense and their level versus the defense is rising, but keep your excitement for the Bears high. This is a fun time of year above all else, because we have been waiting, football fans, and we now have football on grass, even if it's just in shells or, again, thumps and padded practice. It just feels good to have football back in the building again. So take care. We will see you in a couple of weeks. We'll let you know, give you a little bit more notice than we gave you for this one, and we will see you then.